A 23-year-old getting arrested at Ibiza's most legendary nightclub sounds like just another party gone wrong. But for Eddie Burton, it was the dramatic end to a £20 million drug empire that spanned 3 countries. Even crazier, he built it all while living like a fugitive playboy across Europe, with his girlfriend smuggling drugs in her luggage and their operation hidden behind vacation photos and party lifestyle posts. And through it all, these two had one massive problem haunting them. They owed money to someone called Chog, and that debt would drive them to take bigger and bigger risks. This is the insane story of how a Liverpool lad turned a criminal debt into a multi-million-pound drug empire. This is TGS True Crime Documentaries. If you're ready for more, go ahead and hit subscribe. Eddie Burton was the last person you'd picture running an international drug smuggling operation, and there were 3 big reasons why. First, his age. Eddie was only 23, barely out of his teens. Second, he looked nothing like a criminal mastermind. When police finally met him face to face, they were stunned by how ordinary he seemed, just a young guy from Liverpool who could have been anyone's mate down the pub. The third reason Eddie seemed harmless was his background. He was just another working-class kid from Merseyside. Nothing about his early life screamed international drug lord, but there was something about Eddie that changed everything. One mistake that would send him spiraling into a world of vacuum-packed drugs, modified fuel tanks, and debts to dangerous people. Eddie had already been caught dealing before. In spring 2021, he was arrested and charged for his part in a drug supply operation in Oswestry. But instead of facing the music, Eddie made a decision that would define the next 3 years of his life. He ran. And for demonetization purposes, we're going to be referring to cocaine as blow throughout this story. Eddie fled to Europe thinking he could lay low and start fresh, but running from the law doesn't make your problems disappear. If anything, it makes them worse. And Eddie was about to learn that lesson the hard way. In Europe in 2021, he thought he was free. No more worrying about UK police knocking on his door. No more looking over his shoulder walking down Liverpool streets. But freedom came with a price. Eddie was broke, far from home, and owed money to some very dangerous people. That's when someone called Chog entered the picture. We don't know much about Chog, but what we do know is terrifying. Chog was the kind of person who could make threats that Eddie took seriously. Messages later found on Eddie's phone revealed the truth. Eddie wasn't living it up in Europe by choice. He was working off a massive debt. Eddie bounced between Holland, Germany and Spain, always moving, always working, but he wasn't alone in this. Back in Liverpool, his girlfriend Shun Banks was about to become his most valuable asset. Shun was 25, 2 years older than Eddie and completely devoted to him. When Eddie called, she answered. When he needed money, she sent it. When he needed drugs smuggled, she packed her bags. By 2022, Eddie had found his base of operations. An apartment in North Amsterdam became his headquarters. But this wasn't some glamorous penthouse, it was a drug factory. Eddie spent his days vacuum packing hundreds of kilograms of blow, heroin and ketamine. The scale was mind-blowing. We're talking about over 300 kilograms of drugs being processed in a single flat. Even their dog Marley was part of the operation. Having a pet made Eddie and Sian look like a normal couple to neighbours. Just 2 young people in love, living in Amsterdam with their dog. Nobody suspected that behind closed doors, Eddie was running one of the biggest drug importation schemes the UK had ever seen. The operation, by summer 2022, Eddie's operation was in full swing. The plan was brilliantly simple. Vacuum pack massive quantities of drugs in the Amsterdam flat, load them onto lorries, drive those lorries through Europe to Dover, sell the drugs in the UK, use the profits to pay back Chog and keep the operation running. But Eddie couldn't do it alone. That's where Sian became crucial. She wasn't just the girlfriend supporting him from back home, she was an active participant in the smuggling operation. Between June 2022 and October 2023, Sian travelled to the Netherlands and Spain every month to visit Eddie. To anyone watching, she looked like a devoted girlfriend visiting her boyfriend who was working abroad. The reality was very different. Sian was there to help prepare drug shipments, launder money, and personally smuggle smaller amounts of drugs back to the UK in her luggage. On 2 occasions in August 2022, she walked through Liverpool John Lennon Airport with blow and ketamine hidden in her bags. Airport security never suspected a thing. The messages between Eddie and Sian revealed just how deep she was in the operation. When Eddie told her he was going to be busy with 135 bits, She responded with "Wowza." She knew exactly what he meant. In their world, bits meant kilograms of drugs. Eddie was about to process 135 kilograms of illegal substances. On another occasion, Eddie mentioned he was getting a vacuum packing machine to package tops, their slang term for blow. Sian knew the code, she knew the business, and she was all in. The first strike. On July 3rd, 2022, everything changed. Border Force officers at Dover stopped a lorry during routine inspections. What they found inside shocked even experienced customs officials. Packed into boxes in a little shopping bag were 90 kilograms of ketamine and 50 kilograms of blow. The street value was over £6.5 million. But this wasn't just any random drug bust. Forensic analysis revealed something that would send Eddie's world crashing down. His DNA was found on a packet containing white powder marked Jota K1. The drugs were being smuggled for someone called Jota, but Eddie's fingerprints were all over the operation. 2 days later, Eddie broke the news to Sian. The lorry had been stopped. In a panic, Sian worried that her fingerprints would be on the bags. Eddie tried to calm her down, telling her that because she'd never been arrested, her prints wouldn't be on file anyway, but Eddie knew he was in trouble. His fingerprints were definitely on file from his previous arrest. The messages in the following days show just how the pressure was building. Sian complained to Eddie about money, saying she worked all week only to run out of cash by the weekend, while he earns enough in 10 minutes to last 3 months. The easy money was addictive, but the risks were getting higher. Doubling down, most people would have stopped after losing £6.5 million worth of drugs to customs. But Eddie wasn't most people. He was in debt to Chog, and that debt wasn't going away just because one shipment got caught. If anything, the pressure was mounting. Between August 5th and 9th, Shan visited Amsterdam again. This time they were preparing something even bigger. While she was there, a second lorry left Poland, heading for Dover. But Eddie had learned from the first bust. This time the drugs were better hidden. Border Force officers intercepted the second lorry on August 12th. When they searched it, they initially found nothing. Then they discovered something incredible. The fuel tank had been modified. It had a secret hatch that, when opened, revealed packages containing 142 kilograms of blow and 25 kilograms of heroin. The street value was around £12.7 million. Once again, forensic analysis came back positive for Eddie's fingerprints and DNA. He was connected to both shipments. In total, Eddie's operation had attempted to smuggle 307 kilograms of drugs worth £20 million into the UK. It was one of the largest drug importation attempts in recent history. While all this was happening, Eddie and Sian were living like international playboys. Eddie moved between Amsterdam, Spain and Germany like he was on an extended European vacation. Sian flew out monthly to visit him, posting pictures that made their life look glamorous and carefree. But behind the Instagram posts and party photos, the pressure was building. Messages show Eddie complaining that although he had paid off £50,000 of his debt to Chog, it had actually risen to £16,000 because he was being blamed for not vacuum packing the drug hauls properly. In the drug world, mistakes are expensive, and Eddie was making costly ones. Around the same time, Eddie started getting paranoid. He told Sian he was worried his Amsterdam flat was being watched. Chog told him to move everything to Galloway's, presumably another location. The walls were closing in, but Eddie kept pushing forward. Sian visited again between September 30th and October 6th, but the relationship was showing strain. The constant pressure, the travel, the paranoia, it was taking its toll on both of them, yet they couldn't stop. The debt to Chog kept them trapped in the cycle, living on borrowed time. By late 2022, Eddie was exhausted. The vacuum packing, the constant moving, the pressure from Chog, it was all becoming too much. When the offer of more work came up in Spain, he jumped at the chance. Maybe a change of scenery would help. Maybe Spain would be safer than Amsterdam. Eddie relocated to Spain and Sian continued her monthly visits. To anyone watching, they looked like a young couple making the most of life in Europe. Eddie was living between luxury locations. Sian was traveling constantly, and they seemed to have unlimited money for their lifestyle. But they weren't tourists. They were fugitives, and fugitives always get caught eventually. The irony is that Eddie's downfall had nothing to do with the massive drug importation scheme he'd been running. In August 2023, Spanish police arrested him at Pacha nightclub in Ibiza for completely unrelated drug dealing offences, of all the places to get caught. One of the most famous nightclubs in the world, surrounded by partygoers and celebrities. Even then, Eddie tried to stay one step ahead. He was using the false name Ewan Banks, taking Cian's surname as his alias, but it didn't matter. Once police had him in custody, it was only a matter of time before they connected him to the massive investigation that had been building in the UK. Eddie's arrest in Ibiza set off a chain reaction. He was extradited to Germany first, where he faced drug charges there. Meanwhile, back in the UK, investigators were building their case against both Eddie and Cian. In December 2023, police arrested Cian in Liverpool, the loyal girlfriend who had travelled to Europe every month, who had smuggled drugs in her luggage, who had laundered money and prepared drug shipments. Her time was up too. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Phone records showed their criminal communications. Forensic analysis connected Eddie to both lorry seizures. Bank records revealed the money laundering operation. Text messages exposed their roles in the conspiracy. In February 2024, both Eddie and Cian appeared in court. Cian pleaded guilty to 7 charges, including importing Class A drugs and money laundering. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Eddie's case was more complicated. During his February court appearance, he handed the judge a letter claiming he was a victim of modern slavery. He wrote that threats had been made against his family's life and he'd been forced to go abroad to pay off debts. Judge Simon Taylor wasn't buying it. The sentencing was adjourned, but Eddie knew it was hopeless. As he was led to the cells, he shouted that he had lied in the letter and it's going to be the same outcome regardless. In September 2024, Eddie appeared in court for the final time. Any hope of avoiding a lengthy prison sentence had evaporated. Judge Taylor sentenced him to 19 years in prison. At 23 years old, Eddie would be in his 40s before he tasted freedom again. The operation that started as a way to pay back a debt to Chog had ended in complete disaster. Eddie and Cian's relationship was over. Their freedom was gone. Their future was destroyed. NCA Senior Investigating Officer John Turner summed it up perfectly. Burton, with Banks' help, attempted to smuggle huge quantities of harmful drugs into the UK, believing he could operate with impunity overseas. The drugs, had they reached their final destination, would have had a destructive impact on our communities. Lessons in greed. Eddie Burton's story is a perfect example of how trying to solve one problem with crime only creates bigger problems. He started by fleeing a relatively minor drug charge in the UK. That decision led him into debt with dangerous people. That debt forced him into international drug smuggling. The smuggling made him a target for law enforcement across multiple countries. At every step, Eddie had the choice to stop. He could have returned to the UK and faced his original charges. He could have cut ties with Chog and found legitimate work in Europe. He could have stopped after the first lorry was seized at Dover. Instead, he kept doubling down. The lifestyle, the money, the power, it was all addictive, and Cian got caught up in it too. Her loyalty to Eddie cost her 5 years of her life. Today, Eddie is serving his 19-year sentence and Cian has been released after serving her time. The £20 million drug empire that seemed so untouchable from their European hideouts turned out to be nothing more than an elaborate house of cards. And when it fell, it buried them both. The boy from Liverpool who thought he could outrun the law learned the hardest possible lesson. In the end, the law always catches up. Whether it's in a courtroom in the UK or a nightclub in Ibiza, justice finds a way. Thanks for watching and remember, you are awesome.